The clock on my smartphone screen showed 2:14 a.m. My old 16-story building greeted me with its usual mix of smells: stale dust, cat urine, and slightly burnt plastic. The elevator, a marker-defaced metal box from the 90s, was waiting on the first floor. I stepped inside, pressed the melted button with the number 7, and leaned my back against the cold wall as the doors creaked shut. The cabin jerked and crawled upward. At first, everything was as usual. The steady hum of the winch, the flickering numbers on the scratched display. But at number 5, the elevator suddenly slowed down. The familiar mechanical hum changed into a low, guttural vibration. The display blinked and died. I took out my phone. No signal. I checked the time. 2:17. The cabin had been moving for 3 minutes, which was impossible for 7 floors. Suddenly, the movement stopped. No jolt, no sound of brakes. The elevator just smoothly froze in space. The light went out for a second, and when it came back on, the doors slid open with a heavy, metallic groan. It was not the 7th floor. I took a hesitant step forward, keeping 1 foot in the cabin. Instead of the familiar crane landing with ashtrays and battered neighbors' doors, an endlessly long corridor stretched out before me. It faded into the yellowish gloom of dim bulbs hanging right from the ceiling on bare wires. On the floor lay an old, worn-out red carpet with a classic Soviet pattern. The air here was absolutely dry, dead. It smelled of dust, old paper, and had a sharp, nauseating aftertaste of cheap incense. I instinctively reached for the elevator panel to press the first floor button, but the doors suddenly slammed shut with the force of a guillotine, almost severing my hand. The elevator behind me let out a hollow thud and moved, but not down or up. Judging by the sound of the steel cables, the cabin was moving away somewhere sideways, deep into the monolithic concrete wall, until the sound died away completely. I was left alone. I cautiously moved down the corridor. The thick carpet completely absorbed the sound of my footsteps. On both sides were massive doors, upholstered in cracked black turpentine. On each door, a white cross was drawn with an uneven, sweeping line. The peepholes on all the doors were thickly smeared from the inside with something dark. It seemed absolute silence reigned here, but the further I walked, the more details my hearing began to catch. From behind the door, numbered 404, even though the apartments in my entrance ended at 64, came a steady, muffled thud, 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 as if someone was methodically and monotonously beating their bare forehead against a concrete wall. From behind the next doors came a whisper. It was fast, rhythmic, but the words merged into an unnatural mush. I froze, listening. It was a prayer, but it was being read backwards, and the voice resembled the scraping of rusty metal. Suddenly, about 10 meters ahead, a drawn-out creak echoed. One door, the only one without a number and without a cross, slowly opened inward. Pale light spilled through the crack. From there, a bare foot silently stepped onto the red carpet. The skin on it was an ashen gray, stretched over the bones like parchment. A moment later, a tall, almost 2-meter figure stepped entirely into the corridor. It was dressed in a shapeless, filthy black cassock. The figure slowly, with an unnatural crunch in its neck, turned its head toward me. It had no face, just a perfectly smooth, blind oval of gray skin. But I felt with every cell of my body that it was staring intently at me. The creature raised a long, thin arm and pointed a finger right at my chest. Panic hit my nerves. I turned around and rushed back. I ran, choking on the dust, vainly searching for an exit. There it was, a green exit sign above battered metal doors. I threw my whole weight against the rusty handle and flew onto the stairs. I started running down, skipping every 2 steps. One flight, a second, a third. The light on the walls turned into blood-red emergency lighting. I stopped to catch my breath and looked down into the shaft between the flights, hoping to see the ground floor. But the geometry of the space was broken. The stairs didn't go down. They bent at an impossible angle and went up. I saw my own back about 5 flights above. It was a closed loop. The stairs formed an infinite square, looping back on itself. And from above, from the exact spot I had just run from, came slow, barefoot steps. The faceless creature stepped onto the stairs. It didn't run. It just inevitably descended toward me, ignoring the laws of gravity. I rushed down, leaping over the steps, but with every lunge, the air grew thicker, as if I was trying to run through setting pitch. My legs grew heavy as lead. In the middle of the flight, my body simply refused to obey. I froze, paralyzed, pinned to the dirty railing by an invisible, colossal weight. From above came the slow steps. The creature was descending. When it reached the same step as me, the temperature dropped so much that a cloud of steam burst from my mouth. The tall figure in the filthy cassock slowly leaned in. Its perfectly smooth grey face came right up to mine. The creature had no eyes, but I felt this heavy, unblinking stare that pierced right through my skull and picked at my thoughts like a cold needle. The creature froze, a millimeter from my nose. The skin on its face pulsed faintly, and suddenly I felt a sharp, unbearable pain in my chest. My jaw swung open on its own, as if forced apart by invisible metal spreaders. The creature began to draw in air. I wanted to scream, but I had no voice. I felt something vitally important being forcefully pulled from my lungs, from my throat, from my very consciousness. It was like a raw nerve being slowly ripped out without anesthesia. Along with this invisible stream, my memories vanished. My mother's face, my apartment number, my own name. All of it tore away from my mind in chunks and was sucked into the void before me. My vision went dark, and the last thing I felt before losing consciousness was the sensation of free falling into an infinite black abyss. When consciousness returned, the pain came first, a dull, aching spasm in every joint. Then the smell hit, a thick, suffocating aroma of melted wax, rust, and old, dried blood. I forced my eyes open. I was lying on my back on an incredibly cold concrete slab. There were no stairs around, no stairwell. It was a huge, circular room with perfectly smooth walls, without a single seam or window. The space was lit by hundreds of thin black candles placed right on the floor. Their light picked out bizarre geometric patterns from the darkness, drawn in chalk around the slab I was lying on. The geometry of these lines was distorted. The longer I looked at them, the dizzier I got, as if space here operated under different laws. I instinctively jerked, but my wrists and ankles were deadlocked to the concrete with massive metal brackets. Around the altar, just outside the chalk lines, stood 7 figures. These weren't the faceless monsters from the stairs. These were people. Their figures were hidden under the same filthy black cassocks with deep hoods, but I could hear their hoarse, ragged breathing and saw perfectly human, albeit ulcerated, hands. One of them, the tallest, slowly stepped forward. In his hands, he held a heavy bowl made of dark metal. Inside it, an absolutely black, oily liquid sloshed thickly, seeming to absorb even the light from the candles. "Dark water awaits," the man rasped in a voice filled with absolute fanatical emptiness. He raised the bowl above his head. "You gave your fear and your memory. Now, you will accept grace. The unblinking watches us and blesses this vessel." The rest of the hooded figures synchronously fell to their knees, beating their foreheads against the concrete, and monotonously began whispering the same broken, inside-out prayer I had heard behind the door in the endless corridor. The man with the bowl slowly approached the slab and leaned over me. He roughly grabbed my chin with freezing, bony fingers and tilted the metal bowl. The thick, tar-like liquid touched my parted lips. It didn't taste like water. It was the concentrated taste of rust, old ash, and absolute, dead cold. I clenched my teeth, desperately shaking my head, but the liquid seemed to have a will of its own. It slipped through the gaps between my teeth like a slippery, pulsating parasite and forced its way down my throat, blocking my breath. I choked. My body reflexively forced me to swallow, and at that very moment, an infernal heat exploded in my chest. The transformation began with the veins. I watched with my own eyes as black capillaries flared up under the pale skin of my arms. They grew, branching out like the roots of a rotten tree, scorching every cell. My blood coagulated, turning into the same heavy substance from the bowl. My muscles cramped with such colossal force that one of the metal brackets on my wrist cracked, tearing out of the concrete. But the pain from this was instantly swallowed by something worse. A structural change in anatomy. My bones began to break and fuse right under the skin, forming new, inhuman angles. The fingers on my hands elongated, the joints cracking as they twisted backwards. The skin on them instantly dried out, tightened, and took on an ashen gray color, becoming like old, rough parchment. My nails turned black and sharpened, morphing into thick claws. But the most horrifying thing was happening to my head. I felt my jaws fuse together into a single solid bone, with a gruesome wet crunch. My lips melted, sticking together, forever erasing the line of my mouth. I tried to scream, but instead of a cry, only a low, vibrating hum echoed inside my skull. I was locked inside my own head. My nose cracked and retracted into my facial bone, leaving behind a perfectly smooth, flat surface. I began to suffocate, my chest convulsing. But suddenly I realized I didn't need oxygen anymore. My lungs simply stopped and shriveled up in a matter of seconds. The eyes changed last. The apples boiled in their sockets, bursting from the internal pressure. For a moment, there was absolute deafening darkness. But then I saw. I no longer had eyes, but I saw everything. My vision became distorted, yet incredibly sharp. I saw the heat from the candles as pulsating threads. I saw the fear and morbid devotion leaking from the bodies of the cultists. I saw the very geometry of space tearing and dripping down the walls like living slime. I had acquired that same gaze, cold, all-penetrating, empty. Human feelings of fear, despair, or pain vanished without a trace. In their place, an icy, perfect silence formed. I, though that name meant nothing anymore to the creature on the altar, slowly sat up. The metal brackets clanged to the floor. My new, thin, and elongated limbs simply slipped right out of them. The tall cultist who had held the bowl fell to his knees right in front of the slab, pressing his face to the dirty concrete. The rest of the sectarians gasped in pious ecstasy, not daring to lift their heads. The creature that was born on the altar slowly rose on its new, disproportionately long legs. It smoothly raised a hand and pointed a black finger at the nearest sectarian.